May I speak in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We have two ways of thinking about the saints, and it turns out that neither one of them is very helpful. On the one hand, we think of saints with a capital S: Saint Peter, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Augustine, the named heroes of the faith who made their mark in the world and left a legacy of holiness that outlasted their lifetimes. And then on the other hand, we think of saints with a lowercase s. And here we usually mean someone of heroically long-suffering patience or rigidly moral conduct. Either concept is intimidatingly inaccessible to ordinary folk like us. We don't feel that we can live like the people who bravely faced the lions in the Colosseum and went down to glorious martyrdom, or even our saintly neighbour who never misses church on Sunday, or an opportunity to remind you that she never misses church on Sunday. We don't feel that we can live like these people. And if we're honest, we don't really want to live like these people. Dying violently or living joylessly seem to be the two dominant models for sainthood in our society. And neither fulfills Jesus' hope for us that we might have life and have it abundantly. And the other reason we place the concept of sainthood on an elevated moral pedestal is because that otherness absolves us of all responsibility. We say, well, saints are so out of touch with what our real lives are like. What does St. Anselm know about paying the mortgage on time? What does the lofty poetry of St. John of the Cross do for us when we get a flat tire or go through a divorce or are diagnosed with cancer? The saints don't know what real life is like, and so we ignore them. They have no relevance to our lives in the 21st century. That is what we think at times. And this is what we tell ourselves to keep us safely distant from sainthood. But the original use of the term saints, particularly by Paul, was meant to indicate all the faithful gathered to worship God. Today is not just about heroes of the faith, and it's not even just about our own beloved departed who have gone before us. This is not some saints' day. This is all saints' day. And as a contemporary hymn goes, for the saints of God are just folk like me, and I mean to be one too. Our job today is to take away some of the haloed awe we place around the saints and ask ourselves, well, if we are all saints, what does that mean? If it doesn't mean heroic glory or unhappy perfection, then what does it mean? What should we do? How should we live? The great saints of the church, the heroes of the faith who gave their lives for the gospel, were in fact people just like us. They came from all walks and conditions of life, and they had every type of character. None of the saints would have considered themselves perfect without sin. They made mistakes. St. Peter often got things wrong. He was hot-headed and temperamental and even denied Christ. Some spent many years living dissolute lives, driven by lust and selfishness. If St. Bridget or St. Francis lived today, they might have embarrassing pictures on Facebook of their younger and wilder days. But their lives were transformed. We know that the saints were everyday human beings just like us. And we can be sure that they made the same mistakes and had the same frailties. And yet, something within them led them to do great things for the gospel, to live and sometimes die with incredible courage and boldness. How did they do that? If we are all saints, then we are called to live as though our lives and our memories will still be important 1,000 years from now. How can we live so that our legacy strengthens generations of the faithful to come after us? What the saints had was an unshakable commitment to follow Jesus, no matter where that took them. And we have an incredibly vivid portrait of where following Jesus takes us in this morning's gospel reading. Consider the very first sentence. Jesus looked up at his disciples. Now I think that's very significant. Jesus looked up at his disciples. In order for Jesus to look up at his disciples, he had to be at a level below them. So take your mental picture from old Sunday school illustrations of Jesus standing up on a rock above a crowd of people to preach down to them, and stand it on its head. Jesus was down on the ground as he taught this most central of his messages. He was crouching or kneeling in the dirt as he healed someone prostrate with pain and illness. Picture being a disciple standing around in a circle as Jesus gently and carefully lays his hands on a pain-racked man or woman. The entire laser focus of his love trained on this beloved child of God, ready to pour out his healing grace. And hands on the dirty, bad-smelling, sore body of some hopeful soul, he looks up at his disciples and says, "Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry, who weep, who are excluded and reviled and persecuted. You are blessed, and you are loved, and you are mine." Jesus speaks to us from the heart of frail, suffering, flawed humanity. Because that is where he lives. He chooses to be with and in the pain of the world. And he calls us to follow him there. That was the special charisma of the great saints. They weren't spiritual athletes accruing an ever-escalating number of holiness points. They knew that their own weaknesses, combined with the desperate need of the world, created the very conditions for God to work miracles. And they gave themselves to that process wholeheartedly. We might have thought that the saints would bring all their strength and intelligence to bear on the levers of power and wealth. But no, they entrusted their weak and wounded selves to the Jesus they found at the bottom of the world, at the bottom of the chasm within themselves, looking up at them and telling them that they were loved and blessed. And they heard him there. They followed him there. And through them, he changed the world. Many of us hearing this gospel today are not literally poor or hungry. But those of us blessed with economic riches and social privileges are often desperately poverty-stricken in other ways. So many of us are hungry for meaning in our lives. We weep silent, inward tears of loneliness and depression. We hunger for community without realizing it. We thirst for our own lost integrity and hope in a world driven mad by greed and cynicism and war and violence. But we need not fear looking down into the depths of suffering, both inward and outward. Whether we run from the hungry and the oppressed around the world and in our own neighborhood, or from the undiscovered darkness within our own hearts. When we look down into those places, we find Jesus looking up at us. And where he is, we need never fear to go. That is what the saints, the heroes of faith, knew. They saw Jesus looking up at them and calling them blessed. And so they followed him down into the depths. And there they found healing and joy and communion with God and with one another. So what is a saint? An individual who follows Jesus down to join him in lifting the whole world up. That is all a saint is. No glory, no perfection, not even any particular holiness. Just following Jesus, just mustering the courage to say yes to his love that reaches out to touch us in our poorest and most wounded places. Want to know if you're a saint? See Jesus look up at you and say, you are blessed. Take that truth into your heart and know that today, All Saints' Day, is for you.